Very, very nice, Sarah. Thank you very, very much. I told your president I was delighted she was getting a chance to go to Washington and represent you. It's my first time to your campus, and everybody's been gracious, and I chose a cabinet of advisors here in the first two rows, and people like Mary and Melanie and Josh gave me some advice. I asked them the question, what do you think your fellow schoolmates might want me to talk about? And they talked about the issues of service and leadership, and I was particularly taken, Melanie, by this question, so what inspires you? Who or what inspires you? And then when Josh, as you were talking about, and so how do you implement? Once you are inspired, once you're doing something, how do you make it real to life every day? And so I begin today with words from William Carlos Williams, who once said, "It's difficult to find news in a poem, and yet men die miserably every day because of a lack of what we find in poetry." I was stunned when I had been thinking about a poet whom I was planning to quote, and then I looked and saw she was your convocation speaker in 1991, Maya Angelou. And it was at that same period, at the installation of President Clinton, amazingly, before most of you were born, faculty, you may feel old along with me right now, that she began and dazzled and inspired this country by challenging us with these words: "Lift up your eyes upon this day breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, take it, this dream, into the palms of your hands. Mold it into the image of your most private self, sculpted into the shape of your most public need. Here on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face and say simply, very simply with hope, good morning. Good morning to Gettysburg College. Good morning.
Good morning.
I am delighted to be here. Give Maya Angelou a hand for inspiring us with poetry. Give her a hand for inspiring us with poetry. And so today I'm going to talk to you about dreams and values. About dreams and values. And my essential point is that the way we think about ourselves, the things we consider important, the things to which we aspire, whatever we want to be, whoever we want to become, as a society, as individuals, will shape what we do in our actions and actually will determine our destiny. That we become like that which we love. You know, when Mary said to me, some of us are getting close to graduation, or even if we're not, we're wondering what's our future going to be. You know, and everyone in here, all of you students, you're thinking, well, will I be okay? And the first thing I'm going to tell you may surprise you. You are among the world's most privileged young people. Not just the most privileged in our country, but in the world. When you have the opportunity to go to a wonderful liberal arts college, placed in such a great historical setting, when you have the advantages of family and the college working to give you the support you need, you are clearly of great privilege. Whether you come from a lot of money and as a family or not, you're in a setting that allows you to get a wonderful liberal arts education. I am delighted to be from a campus that has students from 150 countries. And I find that we learn from each other all the time. And I'm going to give this an international perspective in a moment. But when I was invited to speak, I was asked to talk something about the story, about my own story, and to relate it to what's happening now, and to say something that might be of interest to you. Now, one of the things you should know is that on my campus, we are flipping a lot of classes. We are working to understand what students know already, and we're giving them assignments and have them, whether it's in an engineering course or in a literature course, having them to prepare before class, and then when they get to class, rather than simply lecturing, we're doing more and more of the give and take. And so I began flipping this setting by getting some advice from my cabinet right here, and I'm thinking about what they said to me about all the ways in which this college focuses on service, and was really impressed with the way you supported the faculty member and the students, Stephanie and Mauricio, when talking about those getting the awards. So whether it's about service or leadership, you're thinking about those things and how you help other people. You know that you are a privilege. And the question becomes, well, what do I bring to this conversation? How might I do it in a way that keeps your attention? So what I want to do is for the next 15 minutes or so to talk and to leave some time, 15, 20 minutes at most, for exchange. So start thinking right now about a question you might want to ask me. Rabi, a Nobel laureate, said that when he was growing up in New York, all of his friends' mothers would ask them at the end of each school day, what did you learn in school? He said, but not my Jewish mother. My Jewish mother would say, Izzy, did you ask a good question today? And the practice of encouraging his curiosity, he said, made him the thinker he became. If you were to ask me what I would hope for every student here in the college experience, it would be that that student would have the chance to learn, to open his or her mind, to understand different perspectives, and to ask good questions. You heard Sarah talking about my growing up in Birmingham. The world was so different in 1963 from today. Just as the world in 1963 was very different from 1863, if you think about it for a minute. When you think about Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War, none of us could fully imagine what it meant to be a slave or a slaveholder. And yet, in 1963, what we find is that many people were living in second-class citizenship. And so as a little kid, I loved two things, math and food. I love to eat. So I was a fat little kid getting smarter all the time. And I was literally doing problems, and I was sitting there in church, and I didn't want to be, who wants to be in church in the middle of the week, right, little kid? And they insisted that I come to this. And what was amazing was that they would placate me by allowing me to bring my math book and my M&Ms. Even then, folks, they had these M&Ms, the kind with the peanuts in them. I love those guys, right? And so I was eating M&Ms doing math in seventh heaven when the man made the comment about going to march. Why would I be willing to go and march when I knew there were going to be dogs and fire hoses? Well, for one simple reason. I always heard that the schools where the white kids went were much better than our schools. I knew that I was always insulted that we had to use their books after they threw them away. They would put brown paper back, this paper around the books and tell us not to peel it back because it showed where these books had come from, the schools that white kids had gone to. And they would say, under no circumstances do you peel it back. Well, who got in trouble every year because I'd always peel it back? But Freeman, right? I peeled it back, and I'll never forget, in the second grade, I knew exactly when I saw the name of the white school. And I went up and I said, why would they give us their hand-me-down books? What are they saying about us? And the first thing she said was, boy, I told you not to pull that paper back. You're in trouble. But then she said something I will never forget. She said, just remember, the book may be second rate, but you are a child of God, and you don't let anyone else define who you are. That you don't have time to be a victim. And I would suggest to each of you, young man, young woman of any race, the first message for me in the second grade is a message I want you to have. It is just that only you can define who you will be. There will be times in your lives when others will try to tell you who you are. There will be times when they will tell you what you can and cannot do. But a part of becoming a liberally educated person is that you have the ability to think critically and to look in the mirror and to know exactly who you are and what you want to do and how you want to live your life. And most important, that it doesn't help to be a victim, even when people are prejudiced or when people are not being fair. Because if you allow yourself to become a victim, you find yourself with no power. It is only when you say, I have the ability through what I do to make a difference in the life of other people and my own, that you begin to be empowered. And that's what the experience of being in jail, of really going through being put out of school. I'll never forget, I mean, I was a little A student, and here I was being suspended from school after this jail experience because they said if you had gone into this protest, you couldn't continue in school. Can you imagine? I was a 9th grader. I'd skipped a couple of grades. I was devastated. And the principal did not want to put us out of school. This is about leadership. This is a lesson about leadership. I'll never forget, but the school board told all of the principals of color, if the child was in jail, here's the list, the child must be suspended for the rest of the year. And he did not want to do it, but he had to keep his job. And this is what he did. He called the entire school together. Rather than having us to leave in shame and embarrassment, he called the entire assembly together. And he treated the assembly as if it were the Honor Society assembly. And he called each of us to the stage as if we were being honored. And then he talked about Thoreau's civil disobedience. And by the time he finished, all of us who were so embarrassed at the notion of being thrown out of school, all of us were crying. Because he worked to make us feel very special. And what he said was, these children leave this school today because they fought so that all of you in the audience one day can have a better school. And I want you to rise and give them a standing ovation. And it was such a powerful moment for the children who were being suspended, for the entire audience to understand the profundity of that movement in Birmingham. Because what that movement led to was the March on Washington. What that movement led to was the bombing of the church. What it led to, unfortunately, was my little friends, four little girls in church, looking in the mirror, primping and laughing after Sunday school, not knowing that the bomb was under the toilet. And to see those little girls blown to pieces in their church sent a message to this nation that we are better than this. And when I went to church, to the funeral, and I saw these coffins of these little girls, a picture I will never forget, a picture that I dreamed about for years. For the first time in my church, because the funeral was held in my church, for the first time I saw white faces in that church. They were people, typically ministers, priests, rabbis, and what I saw that speaks to leadership and values in the midst of that grief were whites crying because little black girls had been killed. And for the first time, I realized something my parents had said, which was that you should never judge another person by the color of his skin, but you must look to and understand the character of that man or woman. And I could see in their faces the deep sorrow that they felt. And that sorrow was reflected in America, particularly in the North. And people said, we are better than this. And those actions in '63 and the sad killing of President Kennedy that November, all of those actions led by '64 to President Johnson being able to have passed a civil rights bill. And that civil rights bill has helped all Americans. It has helped minorities, yes, it has helped women, but, amazingly, I can't tell you how often white men have come to me to tell a story. I was speaking to a school board association in Georgia, and I've spoken, and the president of the association said, I want to say something. They'd been talking about what had happened in the 60s, and he said, people think that when you talk about the civil rights movement, it's helped blacks, it's maybe helped some women. He said, but it really has helped us all. He said, you look at me as a white male, the CEO of my company, a graduate of Georgia Tech. What you don't know is that my father had died. My mother was poor. We were sharecroppers, but she saw the little Negro children being prepared to go to college, and she said, I want my children to go to college too. And as a result of that Civil Rights Bill, and then the Higher Education Act in 1965, for the first time, America was saying people from working class and even poor backgrounds could go to college, and we'll find financial aid to help them, because America is better when you have more people who are educated. And he said, I went to college, and then my younger brothers and sisters went to college, and then we could pull our mother out of that poverty. And all of a sudden, we were middle class and upper middle class, and now I am a rich white guy, and people think I've always been like this. He said, but it was because of efforts in that period that poor children of all races could move from poverty to the middle class. Now, why do I tell you this story? The world does not have to be the way the world is. When Dr. King said to me that participating in that march could lead to my being able to go to any school for which I was qualified, for the first time in my life, I believed that my world might be different. And I will tell you, for America, after the Higher Education Act, after more people were going to college, all of a sudden, American families began saying, well, maybe my child can go. Now, let me ask you a question. What percent of Americans do you think had completed college in 1963? Anybody know? I want somebody to guess. What percent do you think of Americans of all types had completed college in 1963 or 64, 65? What would you think?
10%.
All right, 35 or 10, anybody else? 20, anybody else? 2%. So the fact is that 10% of Americans had a college degree in the mid-60s. What percent of whites? 80, 90. You think a lot of white people, don't you? I like that. That's a joke, folks. All right. Anybody else? 20. It was only 11% of whites. What percent of blacks? It was only 2%. At the time, we had not started counting beyond black and white in the 60s. That's how different the world is. Today, of course, we want to know, what's the fastest growing population in America? Hispanic, right? 1 of every 4 will be Hispanic by the midpoint of the century. Now, what is my point? So only, literally, only, you're talking about 10% in the 60s. What percent today of Americans have a college degree? I heard 40. Anybody else? We just got to 30%. Okay, what percent of whites? I heard 60. Anybody else? Don't let me leave Gettysburg saying the student body is risk adverse, right? You can guess. Come on. 40, 35. It's gotten up to about 36, 37% of whites. What percent of blacks? 25. It's gotten up to 19. Now, the fastest growing group again, Hispanic, right? What percent? It's up to 14%. 14. Native American, much lower than that. Okay, here's a big question. What percent of Asian Americans? I thought you'd say that. I usually get a 90. I've never gotten 100 before. I got that. It is 55%. And the reason is a lot of people of Asian descent, particularly Chinese and Indian, come to this country to grad school and they stay. So my campus is, for example, 25% of Asian descent, heavily Chinese and Indian. Let me ask one more question. Think about this now. How many of you believe that there are many more brilliant children in China and India than there are in America? I'll say it again. How many of you believe there are many more brilliant children in China and India than there are in America? I'm seeing a few hands. Now, most people consider the question politically incorrect. They're saying, how could he say that? America's kids are as good as anybody else. This is a very important question because all of you are going to be leaders. I came here today, whether you are into what I'm saying or you're trying to figure out, well, where's he going with this? I am here today because each of you is preparing to be a leader. You're involved in service. in some cases. You're involved in leadership in some cases. Some of you are involved in policy work in Washington. But because of your education and who you are, you're going to lead in your communities, and it's very important that you understand both the historical perspective of how we got to where we are, but also the international challenge. The fact is, there are many more brilliant Chinese and Indian children than there are American children. Now, Americans don't like to hear that. They're thinking, oh my God, why is he saying that? It's not a politically incorrect question. It is a mathematical question. How many Chinese are there in the world? 1.3, somebody said a lot, right? It's 1.3 billion people. How many Indians are there in the world? 1.1 billion people. You put the two together, you got 2.4 billion people. Now, how many of you like math in this room? Oh, it's a pretty nerdy group. That's not bad. I come from a campus of nerds, all right? My basketball team can read well, and they get good jobs. Give my campus a hand for that, would you? All right? And we're winning in soccer, men's and women's. And you've got one of my faculty here, one of my alumni on your faculty. He was a lacrosse player. His name is Steve Gimble in philosophy. Give him a hand, would you? Give him a hand wherever he was a lacrosse player. So 10% of 2.4 billion would be how many people? Don't let me leave Gettysburg saying you're on the math now. What's 10% of 2.4 billion? 240 million. Put that calculator down over there, right? 240 million people. How many Americans do we have in total? Yeah, 300, 310, something like that. So they have almost as many geniuses as we have citizens. And it's because we are a small country. We still are the richest country in the world per capita. But why do I tell you this? Because it would be very important that we do two things. One, learn how to work with people from other parts of the world. And two, most important, that we work to help educate all of our children. Because the challenge we face, moving from the 60s to today, is that while it is possible for people of all races to go to college, the undeniable problem that we have is that kids who come from the bottom 20% of Americans in terms of income level have less than a 10% chance of graduating from college. That because of a lot of challenges from education K through 12 and financial issues, children who are in the bottom group of America, the bottom 40%, are not continuing to be educated. In fact, until recently, we were the best educated in the world. Right now, people over 35 are number 2 in the world. But if you're between 25 and 34, you're down to number 12 in the world, if you're American. And so we are working to get more people educated. In your cases, you will graduate from college. You will have a chance to help other people. The fundamental question will be, how will you live your lives? And what will inspire you? You know what inspires me the most? It is having a chance to talk to my students. It is helping them realize that regardless of what doubts they might have, that they're going to be okay. It is in telling them that whatever they've done to this point to be successful will continue to serve them well. The ability to ask questions, to believe in what you're doing, to study hard, to get to know other people, to be concerned about other people. These same characteristics will serve you whatever you do. And so when my seniors say, oh my God, I got to do this or this, and if I don't, my life is ruined, I say no. It's not so important which job you take or whether you go to grad school immediately or not. It is how you do well whatever you decide to do. Because each of you will have several careers. Mary, you'll probably have 5 careers in the next 50 years. Literally, all right? People will be changing careers, so don't worry, if I do this, I've got to do it for the rest of my life. That is not the case. You will be changing. And the value of your liberal arts education, I tell my students this all the time in our convocation when we talk about our coming together, is that you learn to think broadly. You learn to solve problems of all types. You learn how to work with other people. You begin to understand the critical issues we face in our country. You know, right now people are saying, oh my goodness, over the last 5 years the country's going down the tubes and we'll never be the same again. Well, in 1863, people wondered what the future of our country would be. In 1963, the same thing. But a period that I find, and the historians in the room will appreciate this, especially telling, is the period of the 30s in America. and President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Because you see, people were necessarily believing America's future is not bright. And what was it about his leadership that made him transformational? What was it about his leadership that inspired people, Josh? It was his optimism, his belief somehow that we will make it okay. And that's what I want you as young people to bring to the workforce and to our society through service, through leadership, through policy. It is the notion that if we work hard and if we work to understand the perspectives of other people and if we learn how to talk to one another, if we study the humanities and the social sciences and we develop strategies for listening to opposing points of view, that somehow we can find a path of hope for our children and for other people. You know, in the 30s, you may not know this, but amazingly, families were frightened beyond belief, if they were not rich, that when they became old, they would be completely in poverty. Even though they had worked, this is talking about white families, black families, families in general, if they were not for money, as they got older, they were so worried that they would not be able to have food and even housing. Why is that? Because at that time, there was no retirement from companies where you got a certain kind of benefit, and there certainly was not Social Security. If you listen to your grandparents talk, you'll hear them saying when they get their first Social Security check. And what FDR said was, America should be better than this. We are a rich country. We should not let hardworking people fear getting old because they won't have basic needs met. And unfortunately, people of his own class, very wealthy people, began to call him an enemy to rich people. Because the general consensus among many wealthy, not all, but many was, well, if you're poor, it's just that you didn't work hard enough. That's your problem. That's your problem. And his point was, no, America is better than that. For vulnerable women and for poor children and for old people, we must have a system that gives them support for food and housing, because America, the America that Abraham Lincoln talked about, should be a country that believed in its citizens and that helped them to be able to live a basic life with basic civil rights. And people either loved him or hated him. And here was a man who was crippled, who had all kinds of pain and handicaps, but what he continued to have, even when the Supreme Court was against him, when half of Congress wouldn't pass what he wanted, he continued to say, but I believe in this country. And what he really was saying was, I believe in human beings. And that's what I want you to have today. What gives me hope is that when I talk to my students, whether they are from Pennsylvania or from China, from Nigeria or from Russia, what gives me hope is that I see in every human being this side, this perspective that says, I just want to have a good life, and I want to know how I can help other people, and I want to know that somehow it'll be okay. And so my message to you today is, if you just learn to love to study and to understand the historical perspective, if you give to your schoolwork, to your service, to your leadership, authenticity, all things are possible. You know, at the end of my mother's life, she had been a teacher. She said to me something that was so amazing. She had developed Alzheimer's. She didn't even know who I was. And I tell this story over and over again. She said, I know the end is near. You don't want to hear your parents saying that. But I asked her a question. I said, so what's important to you? And she looked at me. She knew I was familiar. She didn't know who I was. She had dementia. And she said, what's important? Relationships. She said, my relationship with my God. She said to me, I was trying not to cry. She said, hold on to your faith. You'll be okay. And And then she said, my relationship with my husband, he's a wonderful man. She'd forgotten my daddy had died 20 years before. And then she shocked me. I'm an only child. She looked at me and she said, you know, I have a son. And all of a sudden, I'm thinking, oh my God, she had a kid when she was a teenager. She never told me about it. She's about to die and drop this bum in my lap. So all of a sudden, my grief turns to anger. I'm like, TMI, don't you dare tell me this. Wait a minute. If I haven't had a brother, I don't want a brother. It was like the movies, right? And then she said, he's a college president. Thank God she was talking about me. She didn't know who I was. But then she gave me the gift that I give to the faculty and to each of you. She said, but you know, I now understand that teachers touch eternity through their students. Teachers touch eternity through their students. She said, whatever I had to give, my sense of right and wrong, my lust for learning, my belief in my children, I gave it to them and I will live through them. I'll never forget going back to Birmingham and having all these teachers say to me, your mother taught me to love to read and she told me to never be the victim. And because of that, I've been able to move to college and out of poverty. The key to the Gettysburg College community is that you've got wonderful faculty and staff who care about you deeply. You've got families who supported you to get you here. And what they are telling you is, we believe in you, students. You are older than you think you are. You're even more special than you think you are. What you must do is look in the mirror and say, the world can be even better than it is today, and I am the one to change the world. I challenge you to watch your thoughts. They become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. Dreams and values. Gettysburg College, you're a special place, and you can be even better. Thank you all very much.